Okay, it is the top of the hour, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome. My name is Jacqueline Bullis. I am a faculty support and classroom consultant in faculty affairs here at UAGC, as well as the host for this panel, Building Belonging with Military Students Through Student-Teacher Relationships. By joining us today, you acknowledge that this session is being recorded and will be shared with TLC-related materials. Microphones will be muted for this presentation, but we encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. Also, we have enabled live transcription. If you would like to use it, click the Show Captions button at the bottom of your window. Now, I am pleased to introduce you to UAGC full-time faculty members, Dr. William Woods, Dr. Breon Haskett, Dr. James Moore, and Assistant Professor James Bond.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline, for introducing us and making us feel so welcome. And to you, our audience, so glad to have you there today. And I hope that you really, really get into our topic today. What's going to happen is I'm going to ask a number of questions to our panel here, and they'll be working on answering them. And then at the end of our presentation, we're going to open this up for questions and answers. And so you get to ask us and we'll respond to you. One of the things I want you to think about is that when it comes to military life is a series of stories. Now, I'm saying this to you from the standpoint of someone who was never enlisted, but who had aunts and uncles and a sister and cousins who were enlisted and served overseas from World War World War II all the way through the Korean War to the Vietnam War and even in Desert Storm. So I was very, very exposed to all of them and even neighbors that way, and they all shared their stories with either me or family members, and then those stories were carried down through our generations. And so in thinking about that and our stories, then it's really, really important to understand that one of the approaches that I like to use in the classroom is what is that student's story and how am I to think about that story? And what do I do about that story? Because students are, in our military students, they're really, really good at sharing, and it's amazing the stories that they can share. And it's the stories that have helped me to bond with some of our students and helped me to actually have empathy for some of our students and to be supportive of our students. So today, as we get into this story segment, I'm going to start off um, with Dr. Breon Haskett, and I have some questions for you, sir.
Okay.
The first question is, how has you being a veteran influenced how you approach teaching active duty and military students?
Great question, Dr. Woods. I would say that I have a general understanding. And I would even offer an intimate understanding of kind of their circumstances and where they are in terms of their service. And it helps to shape, in a real way, kind of my approach to trying to build relationship with them. I'm a big believer that never really focus on the camouflage is what I try to tell myself, right? It's it's part of their characteristic story, but it's not all of it. And as a veteran professor, I get the opportunity to take advantage of that initial like interaction with them where they can bond with me initially just over the fact that I'm a veteran and they're a veteran or they're on active duty and I've been in their shoes. But to maintain that relationship, that relational trust, I have to go beyond that and build off of that. It's a great foundation to begin with, but it's also very short-lived sometimes because again, most of our all of our veterans, all of our active duty military, that's a characteristic of who they are, but it's not all encompassing. And so it gives me an opportunity to put my foot in the door in terms of building relational trust, but I have to go beyond that. And you said yourself, William, it's all about the stories that we tell, right? And so sometimes in interactions, if they share a story, I may share a similar story. I was stationed in a similar place, or I've been in your shoes. Those types of things that enable me to continue to build that relational trust and hopefully push them towards academic success in my classroom.
I personally have enjoyed a lot of your stories. Um, you taught me about the devil dogs of World War I, and that was
Right.
an amazing story. And so that's one of the things I love about being with you three is that I'm continually learning. And I get to ask you guys a lot of questions, and so that expands my learning. So it's more than just a textbook where I read about it a little bit and then try to remember some of it, but being able to see you guys and listen to you, and you guys, you seem to put a lot of emotion into your stories. And so I think that's a wonderful thing. Well, I'm going to move on to uh, Assistant Professor Bun. And so, sir, how has your being a veteran influenced how you approach teaching active duty and military students?
I think I started in community college, and it was back in like 2003. We were starting to have a lot of military students come to our school where we hadn't before, and honestly, I think that's part of the reason I was hired there. Um, and understanding what I was going through to work with civilian students and how different it was than working with my soldiers. Um, and seeing that these young men and women were coming to us, most of them served one or two enlistments, and they were going to have to go into the same environment I was going into and do what I was doing, going through this transition. And I realized, like, I am so glad that we brought more veterans into higher education, but I also think we underestimate the help that our civilian counterparts bring to the transition, to recognizing the things that we're doing that can set up barriers for us for the things that we're aspiring to. And so, like, I remember the first supervisor that got to know me. I was doing VA work study at that community college, and she was like, "Come here, let me talk to you, boy." And she asked me about my Facebook because my Facebook page, I had been to Saudi Arabia, I had been to Korea, I had done a lot with weapons. And you would have thought I was in that Arnold Schwarzenegger Commando movie looking at my thing. And it was so different than my personality that she got to know working with me. And she's one of the reasons that I came into higher ed. Another, I had a professor that I'll never forget. She gave me a Christmas card because we just had a rowdy class, and I was never great in school. And so I would bark at them, "Hey, shut up. I'm trying to hear whatever, whatever." And I'm serious. She gave me a Christmas card. It was my biology professor. And when I got a job as a professor here, I actually called the college. She had retired, but they gave me her email, one of my colleagues there, and I was like, "Hey, I'm a professor now. You're a big part of this." And so, what I really do with the students that I work with is I try not to talk too much about my service. I try to understand their service, and they can project on me whatever experience they want because it helps me, it helps them connect with me and open up and it gives me an avenue to say, "Hey, like, I see this about you. This, you really need to kind of branch out, get some civilian friends, like whatever hobby you have, do it in a mixed group because it's a real transition." And I think we underestimate that transition that our students that are getting out of the military have to go through. Now we have a lot of active duty here, and so that's a different animal. But that's what really informs how I approach my students, how I listen to them, how I try to draw things out that I'm able to help them with. when I noticed.
Okay. I gotta give a follow-up question on that. And this is for all three of you. So has a military student ever shared with you and it caught you off guard because it was something new from the field?
Mhm.
And while you think about that, I'll share one of those stories really quick. So I was with St. Ambrose University, and it was early in my career, a few decades back. And a student came back from Desert Storm 1, and he came up to me first day of class, and he said, "Dr. Woods, I have something I got to share with you." And I had no experience with this. Um, he says, I was over in Desert Storm 1, and something that I was exposed to over there really has a profound effect on me. I'll be sitting in your class, and every once in a while, it'll look like I'm spacing out. And he says, my eyes will change, and you might see the vein come out in my forehead. And at that point, I'm not really focusing. I'm just waiting for that to stop. He says, but don't worry about it. And I was so glad that he told me, and then I saw it happen while he was sitting in the front row. Um, and the great thing was that he told me, don't worry about it. So he was used to it happening because otherwise I would have put him on the floor, laid him out, and start to look at doing CPR on him because I didn't know how to adjust to that. But that showed me something because here's someone who went overseas. He was in theater. He was protecting my freedom to teach, and he did it through sacrificing his freedom at the time so my life could go on. And so having him in my class, I'll never forget him. You know, it's one of those honors that you get and having someone like that in your class. But that was a total surprise to me.
Yeah. Um, Absolutely terrific, William. I'm mindful of this whole idea that there are a lot of like courses that you can take as a professor or instructor to understand the culture of the military and who our military students are. And we tend to take away most of the lingo. We develop this new lexicon that we're just dying to use when we interact with military students. I know what TAD is now, and so I'm going to say you must be TAD this week just to kind of use those buzz words. And I'm just going to offer that I would say to take great care in introducing that as a method of trying to bond with the student, allow them to engage you with some of the new words, and then you can echo those back. But if you don't, it comes across, or perhaps may come across, as disingenuous. And because some of the students are well steeped in their military environment and the culture that they're in, and some, would rather just be Joe Q student. And trying to navigate and find where they are is a challenge, but because of the nature of the student, it's a challenge that we really need to take up. And I'll just simply quickly add, along with the courses that you can take, like we have a green zone training at UAGC. It's absolutely terrific. Um, Trying to steep yourself in some trauma-informed, instruction or trauma-informed approaches in the classroom is also something that will be entirely useful. And I say that for a reason because most of the students that we are going to absorb, particularly because of the age of the students that are coming out now, that are using the GI Bill and the like, most of them have, been participants in a long, protracted period of war. And some of them are going to have a very difficult time wading into that social milieu and navigating some of the trauma along with their educational challenges. And so um, my only recommendation, that just based on what you said, William, is that along with things like green zone training and the like, perhaps, dive a bit into some trauma-informed approaches, for your classroom because you were teaching face to face and you ran into that circumstance. I'm mindful of the amount of students, active duty and veterans that may be experiencing some challenges related to their experiences going forward. So,
All right. Thank you, Dr.
And I would
Haskett.
say, Dr. Woods, your example is a great one in medical issues. I've seen a lot of that and have students share that. Also, keep in mind, and this goes along with the transition piece. You know, I had a student that I worked with 3 years. I had already gone to another school. He was a Marine. They were doing Toys for Tots, and he asked me to drive him and participate, and I did. And when I was taking him home, he's like, "Hey, can we stop by this liquor store? I need to cash a check." And I'm like, "How long have you been cashing your check at a liquor store?" And he was like, "Well, when I got out, I went through a divorce. My wife had wrote all these bad checks, and I can't have a bank account." And I was like, "Dude, have you gone to the credit union?" I took him to the credit union, and within 45 minutes, he had a checking account. And I know we're in this online setting. I mean, I'm so glad that they did the OER for live learning, and we now have live learning, because that's one of those touch points where they share and we can have a connection and get them over to the student advocates, talk to them ourselves. But it really made me feel like I had done a bad job because I worked with this guy 2 years at a school, gone to another school. I'd known him all this time, and he was doing, I don't know how many extra bottles of self-medication he purchased due to that. I know how much they take out of your check doing that. Like, it was just an easy fix. And I know many of us, or at least I, through my college career, I've had all these mentors that help me in so many different ways. And so, whenever we have an opportunity to build the kind of touch points where we can help with those things outside of academics, it's really important.
mm.
And you brought up something really important also, in that be ready. And you were ready, and so you were equipped to help at that point. Yes, Dr. Moore.
Oh, I just wanted to chime in and piggyback off of Professor Bond there because I think sometimes coming out of the military, we don't know what someone else has gone through, and the fact that you were there to be able to mentor and help, and it ties into what you said also, Dr. Woods, is being ready. But I think sometimes folks coming out of that situation are looking for mentors. For me, when I was in the military, I went in at a young age. And I came out of a traumatic background, foster care system and all that. So I latched on to folks who could teach me something, show me something, help me get out of the situation I was in into something better, learn more, be bigger than I was, better than, a part of something. And I think sometimes coming out of the military, you look for those connections. And I think, James, you provided that for him because imagine had he continued to do that, how much money he was losing, and he was putting himself in an environment that probably wasn't conducive or salubrious to his well-being. So that, when you get the chance to mentor, I know we can't mentor everyone, we can't solve everyone's problems, but making yourself available is always beneficial.
And at the same time, why making yourself available, you have a chance to make them feel like they still belong
Mm.
here in this institution. So I'm going to move into a question for you, Dr. Moore. And Dr. Haskett kind of brought this up. He said TAD, TDY. So how do you deal with a student who is on TAD/TDY or on deployment? That's a huge question. What you'll help us understand the jargon there.
Yeah, so first to clear up the jargon, for the Marine Corps, we call it TAD or temporary additional duty. I believe for the Army, it was TDY or temporary duty. So they similar, and there are brothers. We all have some similarities across the board there. Um, the jargon's always cool, and I'll talk more about that later as we go on. I wanted to kind of touch on that, but sometimes when a student is on that temporary additional duty or deployed, they're in a situation we may not be completely aware of. And The reason
Mm.
why I bring that up is I know that any of you who've worked with military students, you may have had a student that says, "Hey, look, I'm going to be a little late on this paper. I have to go on patrol, and folks are shooting at me or trying. They're in a mode where they're trying to survive and stay alive. And while on one end, if you're not military, you might think that's a little bit extreme, but put yourself in a position of someone may have shot at that person earlier, or they've been in a situation where their life is in danger. And we're like, hey, your APA format's just a little bit off. So
Yeah.
you gotta weigh that. And I'm not saying APA is not valid, but you have to understand the things that students are dealing with when they're deployed. They're in a different situation. They don't have access to their normal equipment or their gear. Sometimes they may be typing up an assignment on the phone. You just don't know. So I would say that you've got to give them some flexibility and some understanding. And before you do any of that, you first have to listen. I think that's the biggest thing. Because if you don't listen to what the problem is or the situation is, there's absolutely no way you have an opportunity to fix it.
And can I add something to that, Dr. Moore? Like, I think a lot of times we don't realize, and I certainly didn't. I had this young man that told me about his job, and it was to load bombs, but these small, like I guess they're cluster bombs, load them up into the plane to reload them for them to go back out. And he was like, I know what they were doing with those bombs. Like he had a really hard day one day. It was me and him in the center, and he just broke down and just started sharing stuff. And I mean, we got him to CAPS, which is our counseling, and we had a really good counselor over there. But are these different jobs that they have just because somebody isn't infantry or isn't doing what you think?
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what they're going through and what they have done and how they're processing that. And I think it's really important to keep that into mind because there are so many different people impacted in so many different ways.
Great point. Great point. And you bring that up, and it got me thinking about something. There was something I was doing in Saudi Arabia where I wasn't directly related or tied in with what folks were doing on the front lines, but my job was to help somebody else do something else.
Yeah.
And just like you said, you knew what you were working on and what it was for.
Mhm.
So yeah, I completely I get it. I get it.
Sometimes I don't get it. And what's important about that is like whenever students have trouble with the weather here, I tell them, okay, have a backup plan, know where you can go to the other side of the city or out of town, make plans for that. But then I had a student in the Navy. She told me, look, I'm going to have problems with connectivity. And she's contacted me. And so I know she had some connectivity, but I didn't know how intense it was so far as having problems with connectivity. And then I talked to another military member that I know, and they said, look, sometimes when you're out to sea, no matter how great it is for the ship, it's not good for your laptop. So you're going to have problems with connectivity. And by having someone to talk to who's military, that helped me to really, really understand that issue and to check myself so that I could, serve a little bit better that particular student.
But knowing that, Dr. Woods enables us to like more broadly build that emotional intelligence. I mean, it's emotional and context, like understanding the context by which they are trying to complete their academics, right? Um, some places have security features where I can't log in directly. Some places I can't upload a video. Some places it just depends on if you're in different places in theater or different rules related to that. Some people on a ship, you're right. You might have intermittent Wi-Fi access or none at all. And so trying to upload a 30 megabyte video file for a discussion post might not be the way. And so acting in that space of emotional intelligence, perhaps allowing that student to offer the transcript until they can get back and upload the video might be a good way. But it all begins with, again, more broadly, this idea of building this emotional intelligence around the true context by which our students are having to, engage with the content that we give them. So, um,
So I'm gonna segue off of that. And I'm gonna I got ready to say shoot this at you, and so sorry. I'm gonna send this one to Dr. Haskett, and then anyone else who wants to follow up, you can. What advice would you give to a non-veteran professor on how to build rapport with an active duty or veteran student?
so I thought about this, thought this might come up. So, I like the idea for initial introductions to include something related to their service. Something to the extent of thank you for your service to our nation or country. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that on the front end, but again, that's only the beginning. I think beyond that, if they do trust you enough or trust the rest of the class enough to offer something as an example or a lived experience in a discussion post, um, I would make sure I highlight that and support that and salute that, and make a great effort to, if possible, relate one of my experiences to what they shared. I think more broadly, it helps them feel a little more comfort in terms of being in this new cultural setting with other students, but it also gives them the understanding that I can share these lived experiences that may be different than the rest of the students in the class, but they have validity, and I feel comfortable with sharing them. And guess what? Dr. H, as they call me, he gets it too. But I do take an opportunity to, if they're willing to share something, like I think James Bond, Professor Bond said something about, the guy loading bombs underneath. I don't have that particular experience, but I could say I've been on a few helos before. And so I might share an experience in that way, live in the discussion posts again, because I think it conquers two things. It allows them to feel more comfortable about sharing those types of experiences, and then the rest of the class benefits from it as well, learning a little bit about that student. So.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting because we kind of hang out with people who are like us. And I remember seeing this on campus. The basketball team members hung out with the basketball team members. Football guys hung out with the football guys, and the track guys hung out with the track guys. And at lunchtime, they all sat at tables that they designated for themselves. Here's track, here's football, here's basketball. But they didn't sit with each other or anything. And so I can see where you wouldn't have experience. And so now you have to get experience as a faculty member.
I think I disagree with that slightly, and I'll share why. Um, we building the centers that I built for veterans, I noticed that the faculty members that were the most powerful with the military students were the same ones that were the most powerful with African American males, second generation students. Like it's not about faking a understanding or like those faculty members that were good because they found the commonality between them and that student. And one of the main resources I went to trying to figure out how to better serve veteran students was looking at the transition that people from prison going to school because there was actually some research on that. and seeing how you help them with that transition. Now, when we're dealing with active duty military, that's different. But when we're talking about transitioning military, the quicker we help them see the commonality between them and their peers, them and the people that they're going to be working with, the better off that will be. And they're already self-isolating. They're already looking at the differences and seeing it as a barrier to connection. I think in higher ed, we have to do the best we can to break down that barrier, get our resources used more, get them building networks that can help them get to the places that they're trying to go.
Professor Bond, I gotta say, I'm glad you disagreed with me because what you said was enlightening. That
Sorry
was
about
helpful.
that.
All right. So I'm going to move on now to uh, Dr. Moore. Here's a question for you. How do you work with a student who is experiencing PTSD?
Wow. A year or two ago, I did a presentation on PTSD, and I was informed by some of my peers that it was a little intense. It was graphic, and I was trying to make a point to explain to my peers that we don't often understand exactly what somebody else is going through when they've gone through something in the military. So the first thing I would say is first you have to acknowledge it that they've gone through something. And I think the worst possible thing anybody can say is, I know how you feel, because nobody knows how somebody else feels. I would recommend you go with like I can only imagine. I can imagine that must be tough. But I think you have to connect with them. If you have a shared or similar experience, kind of like what Professor Bond mentioned, the gentleman with the bombs, he understood things from a certain angle. And I think you try to connect with them, but don't ever castigate, belittle, or invalidate what they're saying. And once you get that understanding or attempt to get that understanding, try to verify that you understand where they're coming from as best as you possibly can. And then you got to ask them, what do you need? Or one of my favorite things is, how can I be of service? And I think to a military person, and I say this to all my students, how can I be of service? Because what you're saying, and I think sometimes as a professor, you have to humble yourself a little bit. Because when I was a younger professor, I'll be honest, I was like, I'm a professor, you're the student, I know stuff, you want to learn it. And it was this disproportionate relationship. And I think that we have to take ourselves off of whatever pedestal we think we're on and be right there with our students and say, hey, I am here for you. You tell me what you need. How can I be of service? And then you serve.
Now that sounds like true caring. And when you're talking about humbling yourself, kind of come down off of wherever you are and then listen to who they are and let them open up to you so that they can fully and truly express themselves. And then like using active listening and maybe even asking a couple questions instead of stating assumptions. And that was one of my lessons today through Professor Bond, because I stated an assumption and he says, hold up, wait a minute.
I'm sorry about
So that's great. Did anybody else want to add to that?
No, I agree with that totally. And even trying to relate our experiences is interested in that. I was still on active duty when I began my academic journey. And so, if a student says, hey, I might be a little late, a couple days late, and I know they're in garrison or they're on base. Um, I know I stayed up, from midnight to 3 a.m. doing papers after a long day. And I have to fight the urge to say, kind of suck it up, buttercup, and kind of lead with that emotional intelligence that I'm telling you, just put yourself in their shoes. You don't know the additional circumstances, and you may never know. They may never share it with you. But just trying to relate, and like you said, Dr. Woods, reflect back on what they're sharing with you to make sure you have the totality of the story. That way you can better assist them, you can better help them without making assumptions and just assuming that they're trying to get a little extra time on a paper. Most of them are really just trying to share with you and bond with you, and it's a good opening for you as a professor.
Excellent. Excuse me, sorry about that. So I'm going to hit you, Dr. Haskett. How about what's one thing beyond what you just said that you think you could do as a professor who is a veteran to advance student success?
So, well, Dr. Wood, you know me. I'm big on scholarship, so like that's just me. But I'm mindful of I think, and I'm definitely going to paraphrase here, but Vygotsky's social learning, what is it, social cultural theory, where he talks about this idea of getting to cognitive development through cultural experience and social interaction, right? And so, how do we create those connections or that nexus in an online environment? And so, my challenge is again, I try to like get into that introduction space early, like that first introduction post that they put out there. I try to hop in there. My introduction tells them a lot about my background so that hopefully they'll hear it or read it and feel comfortable. And then when they get into that space, when they're starting that first discussion post, that introduction, if they offer something about their military service, I try to make sure that whatever I respond to them, it's inviting. It's inviting them into this new culture because it is a new culture, right? And if we go by that particular theory as a frame, we know that we have to get them inserted into this new kind of social construct, right? We got to get them into this social milieu that's an online classroom, and we have to bridge them to believing that this new culture that they're in is for them as well, right? And so constant interaction with that particular student until they feel comfortable and start sharing is something that I would share with everyone. It is that connection. You have to figure out ways to engage with them early to make that social connection. You have to figure out ways to understand that this new culture is different for them, different in a lot of ways. Some are brand new to academics, but a lot of them are brand new to the types of people that they're going to meet in this classroom space and exchange with, right? They may have certain approaches or certain ideologies or thinking around things. And we have to introduce them into that. And then that moves us to a posture where we can get to the development, the cognitive development piece on the other end. Again, paraphrasing a lot on Vygotsky's work, but that's what I would offer. Have those two pieces in place, and it gets you to the space of cognitive development.
Okay, that's special. Hey, look, I'm gonna do something a little different real quick because uh, we had a military member that was in the Coast Guard, and it's Dr. Jackie Kiger, and he put something in the chat that I thought was insightful. And so I'm going to read it to all of you, and you guys give this a consideration. My experience with teaching military students is that they are high stream, low drag. It is not in their nature to ask, is there, is it in their nature to figure it out? So it's not in their nature to ask questions, but it's in their nature to figure things out. And he says, I work with them that might work in the battlefield in a way that might work in the battlefield, but in the education field, it is okay to ask. It is okay to get help. And he says, love my military affiliated students. So you have to reorient them from not asking to asking,
And
do it yourself to getting help.
that's a great point. And thank you for providing that, Jackie. And I would tie that into something I wanted to share is when you're in the military and when you get out and even years down the road, there's certain things that stick with you. Our jargon sticks with us. And I know someone asked for jargon and someone mentioned that it's different across the branches. There's some similarities, but I'm going to share a little story with me about me. When I first got out, I started working for this office down in Tucson for this trustee's office, and I remember being just I was coughing up a lung, just hacking up a lung, and sitting at my desk trying to work, just really trying to put in the hours. And my manager came over to me and she said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" She said, "Why do you call in sick?" I was like, "You can do that?" Where I came from, and I know that you both understand, it was if you're sick, you go to work, tell them you're sick, report to sick bay. They generally give you maybe some Motrin, and you go back to work and you work it out, you walk it off,
Yeah,
or you do
yeah.
whatever you had to do. So when she said, "Hey, call in sick," I was like, what exactly is it? Because I was so unaccustomed to that since I had been in the military. And I think sometimes we have to realize that may be in that mindset. I can't do those things. We don't do that.
Mm.
And, as a civilian, it's okay to do certain things, but in the military, it was a no-no. So we have to give them a little bit of leeway to, get into their space. The old adage, you can't really judge someone until you walk 30 moons in their in their,
Mm.
in their moccasins, right? So
Hmm.
if that's the case, if you're not walking where they're walking, it's hard to make a call or judge. Just be mindful of it.
Part of
I'm
that
glad you brought up that
transition.
example. Go ahead, Dr.
Is I,
Bond.
I was just while you were talking, I was thinking about students that may be a little late on a paper, right? And they're hesitant, as a military student that's hesitant to even ask for an extension. You wrote the fantastic culture of care piece, you put it in your announcements, you gave them all of that. They know that there's all of this leeway and support, but they're still hesitant to ask you because it's not our way. And so that's something that it just hit me while you were talking. We have to be extra mindful of that. We have to let them know that it's okay to be sick and it's okay to have, to reach out if you're going to be a little late on something, and that we'll be supportive of them. We have to be intentional about and not just assume that our military students will reach out because they might not. That's terrific, James.
And Dr. Haskett, I want to tell you, there's a shift going both directions because going into the military, I was raised to always say please and thank you.
Oh,
And
yeah.
the first night in boot camp, I was one of those weird students who had contact lenses. I hadn't got my glasses yet. So I was asking the drill instructor, can I plug in my little thing to, clean my contacts, please? He's like, if you say please to me one more time, he didn't want me using the term please. And I'm like, okay, if my mother heard me not saying please. And so there's a transition going that way and
Yes.
then coming out. Now you've
Yeah.
made the shift going the other way. So
Yeah.
there's a shift going both directions, but you have to understand, folks are coming from different places.
Yeah.
But it was weird, he was trying to get me to speak more authoritatively. And I was like, yeah, I wasn't brought up like that.
Cultural
Professor
shift.
Bond, what were you going to say?
I, oh, I think I just said that's part of that transition. Like it's a lot that we just gotta change.
I had to say this to all of you. Um, Man, my dad, he was a lieutenant in the Army, and he had that same mindset. And I would say he drilled it into my brothers and I. Because it went even to the extent when my mom was deathly ill and they told us how long she had to live. And at the same time, her brother had just died. Uh, and that was Fred Johnson, and he was military also. And I was crying. I was I was a little kid and I was crying, and my dad sat me down on the bed. He says, "Yeah, you know your mom is sick and you know your uncle just died. But when you are at your weakest, you have to be at your strongest. And so just think about what they're going through and think about what you can do about it." And I never lost, I preach that to my sons, and I tell them, this came from Grandpa. And I know it's a good advice. And so when you're talking about military students who don't want to ask for help and uh, they're just trying to deal with stuff instead of reaching out, that is our job to conduct our classes in a way that makes it conducive to them reaching out. And it's okay for them to reach out. Well, hey, got a few more questions here. And then we're almost ready for our question and answer section. So this is gonna go to Professor Bond. What's the one thing that you think you can do as a or what's one thing you think you can do as a professor who is a veteran to also advance student success? Really need that out of you.
You know, so earlier, like I used to be on a lot of the bit team. I think uh, it's important that those of us who are veterans are in places where we can support, explain, add to the perspective. That's always been my approach to just be in as many places as I can where when a military member or veteran finds themselves in trouble, there's someone there that can provide that perspective and advocate for them. I think the more we do that, the better. I feel like in our classrooms with culture of care, we try to do this for all our students, and learning some terminology is great. I still really lean on finding the similarities between you and a student is the best way to get them to trust you and
Mhm.
build relationship. And so to me, that's the most important thing there. But being a veteran member and understanding some things that people who haven't served may not understand, I just think it's important to bring that perspective to other places.
Okay. So let me ask you something. So far as bringing that perspective, what's one of the great things that you've shared with a student that really helped them get over that hump?
Well, like the story I told with the bank account, I think was very important for that student. I think the probably the most helpful thing that I have one-on-one with students is whatever you're passionate about. Like I make music, if you like to write, if you like to act, if you whatever it is you like to do, if it's religion, just do it in a group that's not solely military, because that's how you're going to build the relationships where people are close enough to question things you're doing, to point out how things may be holding you back. You need those genuine relationships. And if you only run in military circles, it's just going to take longer and longer and longer for you to learn about those things that may be holding you back.
Okay. Excellent. Um, right now I'm going to get into the audience and questions and answers and see what they have to ask us. So Ryan, if you could help us with that, that'd be fantastic.
I can jump in and help with
Oh,
that.
great, Jacqueline.
I noticed that in the chat, there wasn't quite as many questions as there was just conversation about what you guys were speaking to, which is really great. Does anyone else want to put some questions in the chat? Oh, we got one from Rebecca Campbell. How would you extend the support you provide to military spouses and dependents?
I think the things we like, Jackie said that he shares his military experience in class. Those types of things help them know that there's a good chance you're going to get if they have a problem, what that problem is. Another thing that I think is really powerful is when we include them in our services. A lot of times, spouses and dependents use the programs and services more, and they can advocate for those services. When we actually have physical spaces, I really had to fight to get the spouses and dependents included, but having those demographics in the centers, a lot of things the service member or the dependent was dealing with at home would come up in the center, and they could see how other people were handling it. They're great resources for one another, and they're great advocates for the school. And so to me, it's a given that what we offer to our service member, we offer to them.
And I would say that if we view the family collectively with the student like it's a package deal. The student and family kind of go along. Just in this last, I guess we're not out of hurricane season, but in this last few hurricanes, one of my students was stationed in Cuba. He's at Guantanamo Bay, another Marine. Um, and they had this big hurricane coming through, and he writes me this email and he says, I might have to deal with moving my family, so I might be a day or two late. And I remember writing them back going, that's okay. It's all right. It's a package deal. We're going to work it out on the other side. I'm going to place an extension in the system. Be safe. Go and take care of your family. But again, being intentional and mindful that it's a package. You know, I've had students that say, hey, I'm going to be offline for a day or two because I'm moving. I'm PCS and a permanent change of station. And I'll remind them that, I moved 12 times in 25 years. I said, I understand it. You're not going to get, great Wi-Fi at the Motel 8 or wherever you're going to. I get it. So let's extend you. Let's understand the student's challenge in context of his family, right? It's a package unit. And just work with the student to make sure that we move them towards academic success because it's a package deal. It's family and military member.
All right, that's a great response. And it's
I
amazing what we can do so far as helping the student to feel at home.
Mhm.
and Dr. Woods, apologies. I just want to throw in one little thing. Sometimes when I get a spouse who says they're moving with a military member, their spouse is military, I tell them thank you for your service and also please thank them for me to let them because those
Sure.
spouses that move and travel, they're that package deal. Everybody feels that. So
Excellent.
I
Anything else down there, Jacqueline?
It looks, Jackie Kiger is speaking in code to me. What is your favorite MRI when TDY and did you consume PDQ? I'm sure there's a joke going on with the acronyms and verbiage. There's a conversation earlier about having some sort of answer key to a lot of the lingo across the different branches. I'm sure that's something that most instructors do have to kind of combat with. But I was gonna say I agree completely with the package deal. I was previously as a military spouse. It's been a few years now, but at the time, like with regards to the moving, but just the stress and the anxiety that comes with it as a military spouse, like there's so little you can do. Like you're just kind of sitting with your hands tied, and it's a very jarring position to be in. Like you are not the one out there on the front lines, but you're also at home trying to manage the life that was left in a standstill. And
Mhm.
while all of our students are adults and have full-time jobs and other responsibilities, like these military spouses have all that plus the anxiety of like their partner being somewhere where they're potentially not safe, and also not having the answers to what comes next. Like, will you be home Monday? I don't know. Are you going to be gone 2 more weeks? I don't know. Like it was a very precarious place to be as a spouse. So I really love that you called it a package deal because I think a lot of times they forget that the family is kind of stuck in a position that they can't help a lot of those times. There's more conversation going on in the chat. Not really questions, but just speaking directly to what you guys are saying. It seems like everyone is very much in agreement to what you're saying here. I agree with Dr. Moore's comment about thanking military spouses for their service. It's something I try to do if I see it's in their introduction or other places in the discussion. Also, those who are military adjacent. I have students who are is a translator and just returned from Afghanistan to support the military. They have had challenges with connectivity. Jackie Kiger's doing a shout out to our UAGC Green Zone certification. So lots of stuff going on in the chat here. Very much got the conversation started, and that's really wonderful. So thank you all so much.
Right, Jackie, I got to ask you a question, Jackie.
Yeah.
Um, Now that you're on screen with us. So as a military spouse, you ever have it where your significant other is deployed and you have to move while they're deployed and
I was going to say I was lucky enough to skip that, but I was not. I did have to move during in my previous marriage. I had to move while they were deployed and have to set up the entire house, travel with some of their gear even, and get that out of storage to help put in and kind of wanting to
Mm.
make everything perfect for when they got home, right? So that it felt like they were walking in to a home that was never their home. So it was a matter of balancing my severe anxiety and constant stress and also wanting to make them not feel any of that so that they could focus on what was going on. And then when they came home, felt like because the transition to coming home from deployment is also a whole other, we could have a whole other panel on that, right? I mean, coming home from deployment is it's it messes with you completely. I mean, and everyone involved. And so the people that stayed home just want to pick up where they left off, whereas the people coming back might not necessarily be the same people they were when they left. So that's also stress on marriage and families is like the person that's home trying to slowly acclimate everyone back to normal. But it doesn't always work like that. So it was very stressful. Luckily, I had graduated at that time, but I couldn't imagine. And we didn't even have kids, so I can't even fathom just knowing what that one position was like for some of our students that have children that are moving to a state that they might not have the support system around them. It's a lot, and a lot of the times with spouses, I think they just try to be like, I'm okay, because it's so focused on their person that's in the military service, which is understandable, but everyone is involved. It's a package deal. So yeah, I agree with that
I hope
statement.
they still have this program called Warrior to Soulmate. I haven't had a student share that challenge with me, but it addressed all that stuff you're talking about, Jacqueline, because so many families go through that.
100%.
Well, I got to move into the stage of wrapping this up. And I want to thank all of you for contributing today and, to answer all of these questions in a meaningful way. And one of the things I want to leave everybody with is, you know what? Whether you're new to teaching or whether you're an old salt and you have a lot of experience at it, that these stories, they become cumulative after a while. And if you spend time thinking about it, and like where Dr. Bond was talking about, hey, get out of your own shell, kind of, and go spend time with other people. So if you're not military, spend time with some military and learn that way. So just what we want them to do, we can do ourselves. And so when we listen to what students are saying, remember, we're helping them to persist, and we're helping them to be able to stay here, to retain. Retention is important to us because we're contributing to their success. And so we're at the front end, kind of like being on the front lines of helping our military students. And take the chance to get it right, because here's what a gunnery master gunnery sergeant said to me one time. He says, "I'm going to give you some advice for all of our military students." He says, "Tell them," he said, "0 meters." And so we want to get it right the first time. And we have an opportunity each time we come in contact with a military student to get it right, because that has impact, lasting impact on them belonging here at the University of Arizona Global Campus. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you to all panel members, and thank you to our audience for your participation in today's session. Please use the survey link in the chat, which I'm grabbing right here, to nominate TLC presentations for conference awards and share your feedback on this specific presentation. Thank you all so much for being here today. Enjoy the rest of TLC. Everyone have a great day.